Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight from Central Florida, just west of Orlando, Florida, I have Not Pixel and Body, aka Professor Pixel, and we're discussing, of course, our TV episode show that we're reviewing right now, The Prisoner, episode 13, I believe. Do not forsake me, oh my darling. And Pixel, you're the young 20-something in here, as I like to tell people, and all that too. So we have a generational perspective difference between things, which makes this contrast great. But we're rounding down to the last few episodes of The Prisoner, and one of the things we talked about early on was that we got a taste early on of the viewing order, how some things seemed to not be in the best possible order, but also how there was a template for certain episodes. That's changed recently, and there was definitely a few episodes that were made to be filler episodes. And for you Gary Cooper fans out there, well, let me just back up and ask you this. Do you know who Gary Cooper is?
Well, I mean, yes.
That sounds like a no.
Like in the
He's considered one of the best male actors in westerns for a long time. He had a movie called High Noon, and that's where this actual title came from, because it was a song in it, I believe. Do not forsake me, oh my darling. But yeah, this is a weird episode, and the reason why I'm bringing this all up now is because this episode does not follow any sort of familiarity template-wise with what we get all the way up to now in Prisoner episodes, generally speaking, and it stands out for that. Now, whether people will like that or not is a whole nother matter, because this is one of the few episodes that they had to make to actually go ahead and get a full 16, 17 episode season so they could send this off from Britain over to the United States and other countries. And the reason why this episode was made, just FYI, I'm sure you knew this already, Patrick McGowan was filming Ice Station Zebra and needed basically to not be in an episode. And hence we have an episode that pretty much does not have Patrick McGowan, but it has number 6. I'm going to let you go first with your initial impressions on this episode.
No, I actually didn't know that, but that makes a lot of sense. This episode is definitely one of the more interesting ones. I mean, just from the start, it doesn't start out with the normal intro, and even when it does get to it, it's still not the normal start for us. And so that's an interesting angle to go in, and it sets a different tone for the episode. Without delving into spoilers, so that way you can go ahead and give your thoughts, your initial take. I'm just going to say I am very excited to talk about it.
This episode, you can throw it away. It's a spy episode of something, and if this is just like a 2-hour movie sort of thing without number 6 of The Village, it'd be fine. This is not a Prisoner episode. This is just, like a better term, as we said before, filler. Which filler is a little bit different than padding to me. Padding might be a little acceptable, but filler is, you can cut it out of these 16, 17 episodes and not miss a thing. It's not germane to the arc, if you will. And I'm not saying it's done bad, but it's just so different. But there's some cool stuff in here. I do have to say I like some of the things they do in this episode, spy stuff wise, but overall I think it's a very weak episode in terms of anything having to do with that. I know you said that you kind of liked it and thought it was interesting too, so I'm sure we'll talk about it as we dive in. Why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Well, okay. Well, I mean, like I said, we don't start with the normal opening sequence. We actually get to see 2 men that are sitting in an office looking at photos, and they are looking for a Professor Seltzman or some information that they can get that will lead them to him. And ultimately, they are unable to locate it. And the intro does eventually start because there's a certain figure that was the last to see it, and that was number 6. However, whenever the village sequence comes in, whenever 6 is in the village, it doesn't start with the I am not a number, I am a man, a free man. It doesn't have that. It goes straight to number 2, who's watching number 6 on a camera. And they also are looking for Saltzman, and so that leads them to a new plan, because Saltzman had learned a technique which successfully transferred minds into another body. So using a man known only as the Colonel, they go ahead and switch him out. And number 6, in the body of the Colonel, is then freed and put in his old apartment in London that we've seen. And whenever he sees himself in the mirror, eventually a woman comes to the door, and he has a brief thought that, oh, well, for her party, I'm going to have to get her a present. And realizing he's not himself, and seeing her, and her obviously not recognizing him, he is just totally perplexed. And I suppose I'll go ahead and pause so you can talk about the opening gambit here.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to start off, because they're looking for this professor, and he's practiced in India the actual transference of 2 different psyches from one body to another. And it's like, really? And yes, this is the late 60s, so yoga and transcendental meditation, people used to like to say them with funky accents to make it sound like it's spiritual, because there was large parts of the entire planet Earth that had been yet unexplored, and mysteries could only exist from there, like from parts unknown. And it's kind of hokey, in my opinion. That being said, if you ignore that concept, them looking at all these old slides, which they used to show in school up until the 80s at some point, was kind of cool, because as it turns out, and this is where the spy stuff is really kind of badass, they're talking about all the ways these particular set of slides could be some sort of puzzle for the layperson, a cipher, if you will. So they're briefly talking about whether some are overexposed, underexposed, the order they're in, how many permutations they have, and all that stuff, and they're doing it in just regular upper level spy talk. And this is kind of cool. It really is badass. I like it. It really geeks me out on a spy level. And we do find out it does play a significant thing, a specific role later on, because we do get maps. And if there's nothing like maps to zoom in on for hidden places and all that, that just somehow, I think, gets at the heart of every guy, on whatever level. That's the cool thing about this episode. But unfortunately, we don't get enough of it, because this colonel who arrives at the village, we don't know who he is, but he seems real serious. And I have to say this, we're not used to the fact that number 2s constantly change, or we are used to, I should say, but we're not used to them coming in where they're extremely militaristic. And that's the vibe that we get here. We'd mentioned, I think, in last week's episode, how when number 6 was basically forced out of his home is by a bunch of these goons, and we talk about how they wear the horizontal striped shirts and how the thugs are pretty kind of lame, but when we get the Jazzy Fitz fights, that's okay. But this one's different. They're basically saying, okay, you're in here, you're needed for this particular special assignment, and this is what we're going to do. And we can tell right off the bat, this is not going to be a typical way of trying to get information out of him. So basically, they just go right to his flat. But these guys that come get him, it's like the military police. They've got the billy clubs in hands. There's no goofy stuff going on, and they just by force yank his ass out. There's no fights, nothing. And you're like, yeah, this is not a prisoner episode. This is an episode that's got stuff going on, and almost looks like it. But it's cool because, in a way, being about 3/4 of the way through, we can say, hey, the village seems to be escalating their importance about trying to find out information from number 6. And we're led to believe, of course, that it's, why did he resign? And we don't know that that's all they're trying to get. We just know that's the chase, if you will. And it turns out that we see number 6 waking up in his old flat in his apartment, checking out his stuff and all that, looking at a picture of a woman that's Diana Rigg level B or C, let's say. Not an unattractive woman, but just middle age. And of course, this is shot from the third person perspective, so you just see like a hand coming in and out and all that too. And to your point, it turns out that this Yogi mind transference technique works. So now the Colonel number 6 have kind of swapped spaces, so we can follow number 6 out in the supposed real world, and then hopefully find this doctor or whatever. And you're like, this is just a little trippy, but there's a nice little montage here of all the violent things that we've done, kind of like a summary in the episodes. And it's really just stock footage from earlier episodes, some of the violent scenes of number 6. But it's good. It's done well, and it's good acting by the guy who's playing it, because of course it's real time. We're like, yeah, are we supposed to believe this happens? And if we accept that, we see all this stuff going on. And of course, even if you can convince somebody that you swap bodies with them, it would really be extremely disorienting. But what we would think normally would happen kind of does, and that, being a fiance, this lady that's basically said, hey, it's been a year now since, you've revealed to me this special information that only certain people might know. She goes to see the guy's boss, which happens to be, I think, her father, and says, hey, what's the deal? What's going on? I know he's on a mission. You can't tell me nothing about it. And he's like, no, I really don't know. And I'm telling you too much, but I really don't know. But what I don't know is if this is supposed to be a different boss that he's dealt with, because we've seen twice now, I think in Many Happy Returns, another episode where we've talked about how number 6 has left the village, has gone to his superiors, and some of them were in on it. So they've got moles, but then also he's met other people that he knew in a roundabout way that he went to, and they kind of didn't help out either. So we don't know who to trust, but it seems like a father-daughter kind of conversation. She's like, it's awful. I don't know if you're telling me the truth or not. She walks out, because this is exactly what would happen if we could even buy it. But it's cool to see, the guy playing number 6 with his mind transfer kind of come in and do the exact same thing with the stock footage of number 6 driving through town in his car and going all that, trying to convince people otherwise, because we know it's not going to work. Very different vibes. I mean, it really, really is, about a third of the way into this episode, the way it's all set up. What was your take on it?
I mean, I don't know why you feel you have the need to go ahead and clarify, like, if we're going to be convinced we're watching a fictional show.
But the allegory part to it that I thought this show really represents well, basically a platform for putting concepts in a play and examining them, not necessarily a spy story. It's not. That's just the vehicle for these things. They've done well in a lot of episodes, not all of them. And in this one, I'm going, this just doesn't have any of that. And we had mentioned before about how I consider this to be one of the better TV shows, because when it's on and it's doing that, talking about something all of us can, as human beings, can relate to, which is a hard thing to do, besides love and all the simple physical things, but like freedom and what it means to be an individual and all that philosophical stuff. I think it works. But when I'm watching this, I'm going, this is not a prisoner episode. You know what I mean? That's why I say it doesn't work, because there's nothing here they're examining. I mean, that's my take on it. You and I diverge in our paths as far as how we take it. I think you take this more as a literal show about spies, and maybe how spies were in the 60s, which, watching it, I can see how people were, whereas I take it as completely the opposite. I take it as, what's the concept that they're trying to explore, and how do we investigate that by number 6, through his actions. You know what I mean? So it's just a different perspective. That's all.
Yeah, well, I will say that a large part of this, I think the actor that they have does a decent job of portraying number 6.
I will agree with you on that. Absolutely, he does a good job.
He goes ahead and he's able to carry. I think you must have been watching Patrick McGowan for some time, studying him. But
those damn British actors, they know how to pull it off, because this guy's not a stud. He's not a midget or anything like that. He's a middle-aged, nondescript guy that you would see walking around. Yet when he's walking around at the party here, and when he walks through and he holds open the doors just like how number 6 does, you're like, I'm buying it. The guy's doing a really good job.
Yeah. But there's a lot of twists and turns that we take from here, because ultimately he tries to speak to other people, convincing them that he is the real number 6. And obviously nobody can buy that. He doesn't look like it. I watch a show called Dark Shadows, and I've watched all the episodes of it.
Thousands of them.
Yes, 1,245, I believe. Um, and so there was a theme, though. There's a theme that is prevalent throughout it. That is handwriting, and they go ahead and say that the handwriting, even though he's in another body, it is the same. And ultimately, as that he is able to pass through, he gets to finally convince the daughter, his fiance, that maybe he is him. And it actually gets a peek in on number six's life we never thought we'd have. He goes ahead and he is able to break down the information on Seltzman because he knew the last location of Seltzman, apparently, but he also knew of his technology, what he was trying to do, and he is able to break down where he is. And using that, getting the entire location, he goes ahead and he decides he needs to travel to the Seltzman. And that is how he's able to convince him, because no two handwritings can be the same. Wouldn't you agree?
The way this is done, I like it because, again, it's such an over-the-top thing, this mind transference. But what happens is he goes to his fiance's birthday party, which is, a nice upscale British affair. And again, it's an outlandish type of concept here, but the way they do it, I go, they do it in a very British manner, don't you think? Where he goes in to see his father-in-law or would-be father-in-law and explain to him personal details, and he goes, again, anything you could say, I could say that the person who you claim to be could have had that information extracted from, and you could simply tell that. He goes, yeah, I see your point. And he goes, I guess you're going to just have me followed everywhere I go. And he goes, absolutely. And that's it. And it's not like they're pissy with each other or they're throwing a big old fit. It's just, how do you convince somebody if something like this happens? Because it's absurd, but they're doing it in that British sense of, I will take what you're saying as serious because you're acting serious about it, but there's no way I can really believe it. After all, this is the late 60s, and despite mind control drugs and government programs and stuff and all these things that have been going on for a long time, the mind transfer thing is so absurd. And that's what I did like about this episode, is that even though it's so absurd, we see that at the time, the common intelligence among people in these powerful positions don't necessarily treat that seriously. So they're expecting double crosses and spies. And so number six knows he's going to be followed. And so, again, spy stuff is cool. When he goes to the birthday party, he knows people are following when he dances with his would-be fiance. And they talk about a piece of information that he's got that she gives him. And we hear him with a little bit of voiceover, like, will she show up? Because he has to meet her at a certain time a little bit later as she gets this piece of paper. And what it is it comes back to that opening sequence of the slides. Somehow there was an order of those that he uses as a key with the name, Seltzman's name, where we see him kind of write it out, figure out the numbers and stuff like that. And it's dopey and it's stupid, but with Seltzman's name, he picks up certain photos, puts things together in the projector, and we get the name on there of Kandersfield, Austria. And I know it's dumb and I know it's stupid, but that stuff is cool. It really appeals to the inner kid in me, and especially the adult, because we're like, yeah, this is spy stuff. And so then, of course, we get a mini montage of him traveling all the way to Kandersfield, zooming in on the paper map there where we see him traveling around with stock footage and stuff like that. And that's cool to me. You get a feeling from the background stuff with him traveling that you almost feel like he's going there because he's driving up the sides. It's just like Goldfinger when he's in Austria or he's in the Alps or whatever, and he's driving up. You're like, okay, it feels like he's far away too. And when he meets Seltzman, you're like, really? You're this really smart dude, and now your undercover identity is a barber in a tiny ass village up in Austria. It's really silly.
Yeah.
But just to comment on that, and I'll pass it over, is that the one thing I couldn't help but think about with Seltzman is, I don't know if he's Jewish. I don't know exactly what it was or if they really said. But again, this is, after World War II, almost half a generation afterwards. And a lot of times I think people didn't realize then in the 60s that the majority of, let's say, people from the Third Reich were brought over and put in government institutions and kept alive because of their knowledge and offer positions. So while the idea of defeating communism in World War II, of being a big part of it, maybe from the Russian front, not so much from the China front, was a big deal. It still kind of continued, but it just kind of migrated over here into the United States, and in the form of professors and putting them in, like I say, government institutions, mainly not just research facilities, but also teaching in public institutions, and other things going downhill too, especially in Britain after Churchill and whatnot. So it just was kind of interesting that here's an example of stuff that happens and people don't really seem like they knew it at the time, and probably don't even think about it now. But his accent's ridiculous. That's what Seltzman's is, and it's. I'm going, really, all this for we're in a village, and he's not even in Seville. But that's a bad joke.
Well, we'll leave the accent talk for Highlander later.
That's true.
But as for him actually getting to Seltzman and their interaction, this is actually where we get a brief touch with action towards the end. As number 6, obviously, even all the way to Austria, has been followed.
Knowingly, he knew this was going to happen.
Yes.
It's part of his plan.
Because, well, he's got to get back to his normal body. And as they put up a small fight, but eventually they do get caught, and it always returns back to the village. So Seltzman agrees to go ahead and restore the 2 bodies, and they're going to watch him perform the switch, because, well, they want the exact details of, well, switching a mind. And ultimately, Seltzman goes ahead, sets it up, sits down, and he goes ahead and gets into place. His knowledge has grown to such that he is able to not only switch 2 minds, but 3. He goes ahead and, well, he puts number 6 back into his own body, but he goes into the body of the Colonel's. And, well, the Colonel's mind is put into, well, Seltzman's dying, old, frail body. And quickly, the Colonel, quote unquote, leaves in the helicopter as agreed. But that's when the dying body of Seltzman goes ahead and says, "I only did my duty." And number 2 goes ahead and puts it together. And number 6, he wakes up and he already knows. He's not quite himself, is he? Because, well, the Colonel is now truly in the body of Seltzman and gone. And that means the Colonel's allowed to escape and produce his own experiments and might never be seen again.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about the professor. I'm like, okay, what ace up his sleeve does he have? And turns out that he gets in there so he can still leave, and now he's got a new body to go off, and honestly, a much younger one there too. So shenanigans can ensue. But if this had been done in some sort of way where maybe he might become an accomplice with number 6 later on, maybe it would pay off. But it doesn't feel that way. And like I say, this episode was originally done to basically just be filler, because with Ice Station Zebra being filmed, Patrick McGowan wasn't really available or going to, and things took a little bit longer too with travel and whatnot. So scheduling was a big deal, and I can understand that how that goes. But like I say, this is an episode that if you had to chop one out of the entire catalog, whether you liked it or not, but basically we're doing it from the editing perspective of if I had to pick only 6, 7, 8 episodes or whatever and put it all together in some format, to me, this would be obviously on the short list. To me, it's one of the worst episodes, because it's not that it's not necessarily done well in certain parts, or there's some things that I think are okay. It just in no way resembles a Prisoner episode to me at all. It's very, Rocky Four-ish, and I love me some Rocky Four. Who doesn't? But you know, I've always said before when we talked about an Xtreme movie show in the '80s, things got to such a point where you know you could have an '80s film, do certain things with it, like we're going to talk about later tonight, Highlander from 1986. That you know it really has very little in common with the essence of what the you know protocol is of whatever movie we're talking about. So like in Rocky Four, it's a patriotism movie that just happens to have Rocky Balboa in it. That's how I look at it, and it's fun and everybody loves it. But here, this episode's the same thing. We don't really get number 6 in here at all, which I don't mind. But it might have been a better episode if we said, you know what, let's kind of have number 6 in a little bit, but instead maybe let's take this third person point of view, or let's look at it from the perspective of a number 2 or somebody I keep saying that we're seeing a lot of in the background. I don't know if it's intentional or maybe my eyes have just been drawn to the vertically challenged butler, but maybe we have an episode where it's from their perspective on what they do during the day. And so very little of it's on number 6 walking around, but maybe we see number 6 going for his morning exercise or his koshu practice or his gymnastics or walking on the beach or his chess playing with the older people by the boat. And we see actually say the butler or number 6 or somebody else that we've come to know, or at least a little bit background character wise. So we get a different view on the village. That would think really filled things out and been much more effective at kind of letting you think that the village is a real place and exists, because I've said before, they've done some episodes where it really feels like the location is a character as well. And I don't know how much it's supposed to be, but if you're really limiting somebody's ability to be free, then you know the surroundings I think are really, really more important. Not these side hack throwaway characters with Yogi mind manipulation. So I'm not going to shit on it, but I am going to say, as of all the episodes we've seen, to me it's the worst.
I disagree, like wholeheartedly. I think this is one of the best.
Okay.
We get a look in on number 6 from a new angle. Anytime he's gone back to London, which he has twice now, there's been no true look at of his life, no examination of what was going on. Here we go ahead and find out there was somebody he cared for, because anytime there's an attractive woman before him, all he does is eventually sweep them away. He'll do what they want, but he doesn't care. And there's no sense of really that free man who had a life, who was going back to something, because before that, it's just number 6. He is just another agent, another cog in the machine of espionage. But now here, he goes ahead and has an angle. He has something that meant something to him back home, not just the opportunity to have something. And I think that's important, especially whenever we're supposed to be following number 6. And other than him at the end of this opening sequence saying, "I'm not a number," what do we have to sink into other than the fact that it is Patrick McGowan? I think this episode is absolutely important to go ahead and give more humanity to a character that claims to be a free human.
Well, I think it does the opposite, because, you know, we've talked about before the concept of how this is very, not anti-James Bond, but just the flip side of the coin. You know, no guns, no violence, no love interests, women you can't be trusted. And here we do have a woman that supposedly he might be able to trust, but we're looking at it like, really? We've got so used to just seeing him grow a little bit more ornery as the episodes pass, and the ante going up and things being escalated on both sides between him and the village as far as what's going to happen, that to do something like this where he's hardly in it, and then when we supposed to believe the person that's with this mind transference is him, that he's now got a fiance, it's just, it takes away from what they've been building for a dozen or so episodes now. And it's like, oh well, you know, our key demographics are saying we gotta have lunch, so let's just force one in there. It's what it felt like to me. And I don't think the lady, yeah, I do. I don't think the lady did a bad job at all. Obviously, to your point, having some things about humanity might make us sympathize with them more, or kind of pun intended, based on the way the episode went, put ourselves in the shoes. I don't think that's what the show's supposed to be. I mean, we don't know what his name is, right? We still don't. We just get his code names from his other countries that we got in the episode. That's cool, but we don't know him. We just know what he's trying to do and what he believes in. And I think that's all it's supposed to be. I think he's supposed to be somewhat two-dimensional, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I think with what they are trying to do and accomplish in the show, that's what's important for it. And I think by having her in it and some of these other things, that takes away from that. So that's where I would disagree with you on that too. I understand your point too with the humanity part. It's legit. I understand that. I just think it's the wrong decision.
I mean, with the series that we've had thus far, how many times have we come to a point where we've gotten episodes that they're okay, but they have there's eventually a point where it gets still. So a new look at a character that we have been going with, I think that's very good. And as for, I think maybe you can go ahead and put the angle that maybe this is why he has never fallen for anyone at the village, because they have surely had some attractive women that have come up, but that could explain why he has no one to basically go to. I mean, we can say he's the anti-James Bond, but there's still a fight sequence in almost every episode.
True.
But I think that this episode is truly going to be one of those at the end of this that I'm going to remember quite well.
It's different, and it stands out for that. Whether that's good or bad, we'll let everybody decide on that too. So yeah, totally different reactions from us too. But it's at least not boring. You know what I mean? So I would definitely agree on that. So any final thoughts on this episode, or just the series as we wind down a couple episodes? Anything you want to point out, or any generic questions that maybe you don't have the answer to that are starting to form in your head as we get towards what's supposed to be the grand finale?
This definitely had the feeling of something is shifting in the series, just with how it was done differently. I mean, whether or not this will come into play for the final episode, I have no idea. But we only have, 4 more episodes, and then we are done. I'm wondering where we can go at this point. So we're going to have to just wait and see where we can finish up, and hopefully this finale that we're going to goes ahead and leaves something in our minds to make us remember.
Now, this is your first viewing. I haven't watched it in about 30 years, so it's somewhat fresh for me, but I have a basic idea of what's supposed to happen. Let me ask you too, because the people that are fans of this show in particular and listening to us and The Prisoner as well are probably curious about how someone like you that doesn't really know anything about it and is just watching it as a first timer based off my recommendation, do you think we're going to get clearly defined resolutions at the end of this, knowing that there was only going to be one season?
I'm not positive. I'm going to go ahead and say that. I hope so, but at the same time, I feel that I almost know better than to expect that. But
why would you say that?
I mean, I just hope that it ends well. That's all you can hope for with a show, any show, that it'll have an ending that will satisfy you. I don't want to end up with Lost season 1968.
I know. I understand. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Do Not Forsake Me, My Darling, episode 13, I believe it is, of The Prisoner. We're going based in order based off the United States releases, so those of you overseas, it might be slightly different. We got a couple more filler episodes before we get to the grand finale, and maybe then we'll find out exactly who the prisoner is and where the village is and why they got him, and what this information is that we hear about in every opening scene that we kind of didn't get till a few minutes in on this episode. Definitely a different one there, so check it out. Let us know what you think. On for Highlander, and I will see you then. And I want to thank everybody for listening, everybody for showing up, and as always, be seeing you.
Be seeing you.